What's up, everyone? Welcome to season 4 of My Boulevard podcast. This season, we're doing something special. I am here with my co-host, Missy. Say what's up to the people, Missy.
Hello, I'm so excited to join you, Dhati. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to talk about the who, what, when, where, how, and why of urban missions.
That's right. This season, we are going to be walking through together, like live, real conversations. We're going to be talking about real questions, really practical wisdom about how to do ministry in urban environments.
Yeah, this is going to be a primer for all of us. So let's join this journey. Let's grow, learn, and push forward urban missions together.
Stay tuned. This season, we're going to talk about how you can do ministry where you live, where you work, and where you worship. So let's go.
Let's go.
What's up, everybody? Again, welcome to season 4 of episode 2 of season 4 of This Is My Boulevard. We are talking all things urban. I am here with my co-host, Missie Branch.
Hello, good to be here.
It's good to be here as well. I'm excited because we are kind of jumping into all things urban. You know, in the first episode, if you missed it, you know, it was what is urban, right? And we just kind of talked about the importance of urban, like our backgrounds and all that. And so go check out that podcast if you have. But today, we're going to be talking about what is urban missions,
Yes.
right? And how does urban missions distinguish itself from any other missions?
You know, I remember not understanding even what that phrase meant, urban missions, because you get trained to think that missions means I am going somewhere to another part of the world. And because that's the definition that is usually ascribed to missions, you would think, well, urban missions has to mean whatever urban place exists in Africa or some other place, not here.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Oh, and that is my journey. You know, when I went to Dallas Theological Seminary, and at DTS, I got a master's in missions, right? It's the MACM, you know, when I was there. And I remember going to them and asking them, hey, you know, I want a degree in missions. And he was like, where are you going? And I was like, I'm not going anywhere. What do you mean? Like, I'm going to do missions here. And he was like, no, that degree is for missionaries overseas. I was like, yeah, that's why I want the degrey.
Right.
But you know, and literally I had to argue with them for like almost a few months before they would allow me to take that degree, because I had to create an argument in a case for being a missionary in America, right? And being trained. And it was at that point that I realized that when we talk about being on mission, is just what you said. Like, we think about missionaries are people who go overseas, but when we're here, we're theologians. And as a theologian, I'm just going to have this belief or this understanding of theology, and I'm going to try to assimilate you to believe like I believe, instead of putting on kind of the missionary hat that we have.
It's sadly an undercover arrogance in that we don't need the gospel. We have it. You know, I took a missions class not long ago, and one of the stats from the missions class, one of the things he just taught us is that this is the first time that people in other countries are thinking, we need to send missionaries to America. So the world doesn't necessarily see us as this Christian nation anymore. They're saying they need help. We need to send people. And so then they come here, and then they get to be urban missionaries.
Yeah. And that's what I'm saying. Like, yes, please come, please help, please send, you know, whoever you got from, you know, and come. But when you come, don't forget about urban, right? You know, in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, Paul says, I have become all things to all men, so that by all possible means I might save some. He goes on and says, like, to the Jew I become like a Jew, to the Gentile I become like a Gentile, to those under the law I become as one under the law. You know, he's just talking about this idea, you know, not to start asking the question, does God care about American cities, right? Because here we are, it is the largest unreached people group, right, in America, right? You know, they say right now about over 70% of the U.S. population currently lives in urban environments, right? They say by the year, you know, and again, the year 2050, they believe up to 90%. Like, people are moving more and more. And again, when we think about it, it's not like people are moving into the city of Atlanta, but what's happening is suburban areas are becoming more dense, right? They're becoming more, they're thinking more live, work, and play, right? And so that you're going to see, it's like it's urban sprawl, and they're turning into cities. And that's what we're seeing taking place, you know, in it. But here's the thing, right? Even though the world is, you know, cities are urban, most of the Americans live urban right now, right? When we think about urban missions, do you know that there is not one seminary Bible college in North America where you can get a PhD in urban missiology. Right. Wow. Again, that to me just makes no sense, because as soon as you say mission, you think overseas, going somewhere else. Right. And that trickles down into the way we think about, because how many of us actually, when we go overseas, like let's work with me here, okay. Right? Okay. Me and you were, in our families, we decided, hey, we're going to go overseas, right, to choose a country. Where you want to go?
I want to go somewhere in Africa. I've never been to Africa.
Yeah, I've never been either. So
yeah.
That's,
okay, let's just
we
say
got
South
it. All right.
Africa. Yeah.
South Africa.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going over to South Africa. Okay. All right. And we're going to reach a certain group. We're going to determine what group we're trying to reach. Okay. We're going through and all that. All right. After we determine the people group in South Africa that we're going to reach, how does that influence all the rest of our decisions?
Well, now, because we got to learn the culture, and we've got to learn the language, and then we've got to figure out how we're going to get there, and then we've got to make sure it's safe for us to be there, and we got to understand the people there.
Yeah. All the things, right? All the things that you have. And so let's just say, like, man, but we also even have a heart to not just South Africans, but like South African college students, right? Let's just say that that's another thing. Like, we're going to South African college because we want to help the future, change the future generation. Are we going to live 2 hours away from South African, the school?
I mean, not if we want to be impactful.
Yes.
Right.
Because it impacts, because you go in as a missionary, right? You're going on with a certain thing. And the reason why I go through that is because when we think about, as Americans, when we think about, like, being missionaries, we think more theologians, being Christians, being church attenders. We think about missions never plays a factor, right, in terms of what we're doing. And so I may be called to doing ministry with inner city people, right? But somehow I'm going to live 2 hours away, an hour away from the inner city. And again, I'm not saying that everybody's called to doing that. But what I'm saying is no one is like, we're not, let me back it up. Not no one. Right. Not knowing. No, don't send me your emails. Don't send me your Facebook. Like, not knowing.
You got that hateration, right? Not knowing.
Not knowing. But a lot of us, we don't think about, like, God's call in our lives and reorienting all of where we live, the type of jobs we get, all of those things to aligning towards that specific calling.
Place. But even we don't think about, and now I need to learn that culture, and I need to learn those people, and I need to understand their language, and so that I can show up and not just throw me on them, but I can become one of them and win them over for Christ in the same way we would for somewhere across the world.
Yeah, just going back to what Paul says, becoming all things to all people, so that by all possible means we may save some.
So thinking about your educational journey and realizing that you couldn't get urban missions, when did you designate yourself? When did you think, I'm an urban missionary?
Well, honestly, it started early, and I wouldn't have articulated it like this, but, in 1996, when I didn't understand, like, why people, I remember just being at church, and I'm just like, Lord, like, why are we not doing what's in the Bible? Right? Because again, I wasn't raised in the church, so I was just like, but I was looking at the Bible and then looking at what we were doing in church and looking at the Bible and I was just like, there's a disconnect between what we're doing, and what's in this, and in the word. And so, like, for me, like, I would go out and I was just like, hey, will you disciple me? Will you disciple me? Will you disciple me? And so I was asking people to disciple me. And what I found was I felt like a third culture kid. And this is another missionary term. I felt like a third culture kid. Either I was around a group of people who understood my context, but they didn't have the same commitment to mission and theology, or I was around people who understood kind of the missions and theology, but they didn't understand my context. And so I felt like this third culture kid. And so during that out of my own frustration, because I asked so many people and they just didn't have categories to disciple me and to mentor me. And so I basically, the Lord basically said to me in 2001, I was actually floating in the ocean with James Roberson, right? And we were basically just lamenting, and we had similar stories, and was lamenting the desire to grow, the desire to be discipled. But we said, we want to be the last generation forced to leave the urban context for sound discipleship. Wow. And ever since 2001, that's what it is. And that's when I was just like, Lord, you are calling me to be an urban missionary, right? And to raise up other urban missionaries to the largest mission field in North America, where over more than half of our people live in the city, all of those things. And so, yeah, and so that was, for me, it's all, every decision, whether I worked with NAM, whether I worked, with Rebuild back in the Rebuild days, Boulevard, all of those things was that. And a lot of it was impacted because I was just like, is God still speaking, right, to the city?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Is he still speaking?
It's so funny. The first time I heard of the term urban missions was with my husband. Mm-hmm. So he's an urban missionary, has always been. But when I began to really think about what it is he was articulating, I realized that my mom had been had done urban missions all my life. She's a first generation Christian. Mm-hmm. She became a believer because of her older sister. And when they became Christians, everything about our lives changed. Everything about our lives changed. She married Jesus in that church. You hear me? But I remember she took an evangelism explosion class. And so we would spend our Saturdays. She would be on the corner in our hood giving out tracts and giving the gospel. And I remember Halloween was embarrassing because she was giving out tracts. But I was like, my mom was doing urban missions.
Yeah, she was an urban missionary.
She modeled that for us.
I love it. And I love awesome. EE though. Oh, EE. Have you come to a place in your spiritual life where you know for certain that if you die today and go before God, that man, we used to use EE and that. But that mindset, the intentionality, like you said, your life changed, right?
Yes.
And she was intentional.
Oh, yes.
She was, and and the thing is that I feel like for people like your mom, people like us, so often we have to kind of do it kind of anecdotally. We have to do it because no one is giving any kind of wisdom, insight. Like there's not many books that were written during the okay, here's how you do missions in America in cities, right? Everything was kind of more like, how do you start a food pantry and all of that could be a part, but like holistically thinking and shaping kind of this concept of being a missionary. And I know I've said it multiple times, this idea of missions, but I think it's of urban missions, but I think it's important because when we think about urban missions and we're talking about the largest mission field, I think it's also for us to recognize just understand the top 20 largest cities, metropolitan areas there's, and I did a little research because there's 30 cities. There's 30 cities that have metropolitan areas that have over 2 million people, right, in North America. And if you look back, these are places that they all voted blue. They all are majority minority. They have the least evangelical presence.
Wow.
Right? All of these things. And I'm just like, why isn't I'm just looking around, like, anybody seeing this?
Right.
Like the world is changing. And by the way, this is what America will be like. And I constantly think about it. I was like, it's sort of like, you have this mega church that was in this neighborhood. The neighborhood started changing. So all the people in the church moved out of the neighborhood and they start commuting in because they sentimental to the building. And then they just kept on growing and for years and decades into a place where they were all 70, 80. And then they basically retired and then, they wasn't doing evangelism. They wasn't being on mission. And then at some point they were like down to 15, 20 people. And it was just like, we're in this mega church and we don't look nothing like our neighborhood. Wow. We look nothing like our neighbors. And then at that point, it's like, well, we got to go find someone who can reach the neighbors. And I was like, this is where American evangelicalism is happening right now. Wow. You have a group of people who are just like holding on to some old way of just doing ministry. And it's just kind of like where America is changing all around us. And we have to begin to think like as missionaries, right? And not just simply theologians and having these battles. I'm all for theology. I love theology. I got a doctorate, right? All for it. But we gotta be able to get beyond just simply trying to have who's the most theologically sound and get back to the all things to all men.
Especially since we are a post-Christian society. Like we don't have a whole bunch of kids who have gone to church before or who have heard of Jesus or who grew up in Sunday school. My kids' peers, that's not their story. And so we can have these lofty theological battles. They have their place. But when you think about just in the streets, these people don't even have the base knowledge that we used to be, quote, known for as a society. And so we have to come out the ivory tower and give them Jesus. And I think one of the things that is probably a sad thing for us is that we've lost this desperation for Jesus. And so that loss of desperation for Jesus means that we're not desperate to also see you have it. Because I grew up, my mom has always had this reliance, this dependence on Jesus. I need him. He's not like ancillary to my world. I go to him for something to do or devotions. So I grew up with this idea that I need him, you need him, our community needs him. And so when she was out giving the gospel, it was out of this, don't you know we need him?
Yeah. This need. This straight up need.
Yes.
Yeah. But as Americans, we don't like being needy.
Right.
As soon as I put that Y on there, everybody's like, Missy, you're so needy.
And you're like, no, I have needs. I'm not needy.
Yeah, right? It's like, but that's it. I mean, so it's like there is that tension. But here's our call, and this is the reason why we're doing urban is like we need more urban missionaries.
Yes.
We need more people like your mom.
Yes.
Right. And when we're talking about urban missionaries, we're not just simply talking about like pastors. We're not just talking about just we're talking about the everyday saint that you are called, you are sent, right, to make disciples where you live, where you work, and where you worship. Yep. Right. And a big part of it is trying to bring some encouragement, some empowering, some strengthening to that, whether you are, a pastor, poet, practitioner, polymath, or whether you're just simply trying to engage with your neighbor.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm studying the lame beggar in Acts 3. That whole narrative, I'm studying it for something. And I think the thing that just stood out to me in the beginning of Acts is when it just says, Peter and John were just on their way to the temple at 3:00 because that's what you do.
Yeah.
They just did that. And then that's how they ran to the lame beggar. And that's how by Acts 4, 5,000 men became believers. You know what I'm saying? Yes. Just counting the men. And you're like, because they were just going where they worship and this is where they live and this is where they work. And then they ran into this and had this divine moment. Yeah. It's impressive to me.
At Blueprint, we have a statement that kind of hits on that point. Is that we just simply want to unleash healthy people, bringing some intentionality and, to seeing as someone who is both in need and has need, right? To become all things to all men so that by all possible means we may save some, right? And so when we're talking about urban missions, what's distinct about it is just simply the word in front, urban. It's urban. It's about saying like we are on mission in urban spaces. And I think that is critical, and especially for such a time as this. I mean, after coming off an election, we're about to ordain, if is that the right word? That's not the right word, but a new president, inaugurate. I knew the word was there.
Ordained, right?
It wasn't ordained. We're not ordaining presidents,
right,
but inaugurate a president. And I think that is it's needed. It's needed for us to understand this, like new urban.
Because people are impacted no matter what we believe or how we voted or whatever. Our communities are always impacted by the leadership. And so we need people in communities being able to, Christian, solid, mature believers in communities, urban spaces, being able to help navigate the different impacts, however they come, even if they're good impacts. People need to know how to navigate that. People need to be educated.
Amen.
We need those people.
So what are we saying? We're ultimately saying that if you want to be a missionary for the next 20 to 25 years, you need to be an urban missionary, because not only are cities right now already urban, right? America is becoming urban. And if we're going to become all things to all men, we have to move, I believe, from an ethnic missiology to a neighbor missiology. And we have to really ask, how am I reaching my neighbors? And what happens when our neighbors no longer look like us, talk like us, and act like us? Because cities are now defined by density and diversity, right? Within disparity, right? And there's going to be differences, right? But they're also dope.
They are so dope.
So, all right, you guys, until next time, we are here. We are appreciative of you. Follow us, like, subscribe, do all the things so that, and then also put in the comments, what would you like to hear, as we talk about this concept of urban. Until next time, peace.